The 7th of August, 1967, Quang Tri Province, South Vietnam. The jungle was quiet, but the silence felt dangerous. Rain dripped from the leaves, rifles steamed in the morning heat, and somewhere beyond the mist enemy snipers were waiting. A young black Marine pressed his M14 to his cheek, took aim at a target nearly 300 meters beyond his rifle's limit, and fired. One shot, one impossible hit, and everything the the military thought it knew about that rifle was suddenly wrong. What gave his weapon that power wasn't science from a lab. It was a 75-cent piece of copper wire he'd twisted around the barrel himself. An idea so simple, it broke the rules and ended up saving 2,000 Marines. So how did one soldier's secret fix outsmart Soviet snipers and change Marine history? Stay with me till the end of this story, and if you love true war stories that reveal the human side of innovation, subscribe, hit like, and help us keep bringing hidden history to light, because what you're about to hear almost never made it into the history books. The monsoon clouds hung heavy over Quang Tri Province, turning the air thick and sour with rain and smoke. The 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines known as Dark Horse, dug into muddy positions along a ridge they called Hill 48. Below them, the valley looked calm, almost peaceful, but the men knew better. Every few hours, a single shot cracked from the jungle and someone went down. No warning, no flash, no chance to fire back. The men called it the Ghost Range. Somewhere out there, North Vietnamese snipers were using new rifles Dragunov SVDs that could hit targets almost 800 meters away. The Marines' own M14 rifles, though powerful and well-loved, were only accurate to about 500. That 300-meter gap meant the enemy could kill them long before they could even see who was firing. By August, the unit had already lost 17 men this way. Each death felt like proof that the enemy was winning the invisible war one bullet at a time. You couldn't fight back, recalled Lance Corporal Franklin Riley, a spotter in the battalion. You just waited for the sound, hoping it wasn't your turn. The commanders had a serious problem. A major operation was about to begin, moving nearly 2,000 Marines through that same valley to cut off enemy supply routes. But how could they cross open ground under sniper fire that reached farther than their own rifles? The maps and manuals had no answer. The numbers said it was impossible. And that's where Sergeant Mitchell Townsend came in. A quiet, dark-skinned Marine from Mississippi. Townsend had a habit of studying problems that others ignored. He had trained as a marksman and armorer, and he spent long nights cleaning rifles, measuring casings, and writing small notes about wind, gas, and recoil. He wasn't supposed to change anything, every weapon had to stay by the book. But the book didn't explain how to survive when the enemy could shoot you from a hill half a mile away. Townsend began asking questions that made officers uncomfortable. Why does the M14's gas system vent so much pressure? What happens if that pressure is slightly restricted? Could that send more energy behind the bullet and make it fly farther? These were not the questions of a rule follower. They were the thoughts of a man desperate to keep his brothers alive. In one field log, an officer wrote that Townsend had an engineer's curiosity hidden in a soldier's discipline. He was known for taking things apart, fixing them, then making them work just a little better than before. He once told Riley, "If the rifle's the problem, then it can also be the solution." Every night, the Marines heard the Dragunovs again snaps, echoing from the tree line, bullets thudding into sandbags. The M14s answered, but their shots fell short. The sound of failure carried through the damp air like a warning bell. We could hear the difference, Riley remembered. Their rounds cracked overhead. Ours died halfway there. The frustration built like pressure inside the rifles themselves. Even the officers knew morale was slipping. Reports described men hesitating to expose themselves, platoons losing confidence. If they couldn't match the enemy's range, they risked losing the valley and maybe hundreds of lives in the operation ahead. The paradox was brutal. The Marines had one of the best rifles in the world, yet it was being outperformed by a cheaper Soviet weapon. Technology, pride, and doctrine had all failed. It wasn't a question of bravery anymore, it was math. And math said the Americans were outgunned. In this setting of mud, fear, and uncertainty, a single cheap idea was about to rewrite everything. Townsend's plan would not come from a manual or from a laboratory in America. It would come from the small exchange shop near the base gate, where a roll of copper wire cost 75 cents. He didn't know it yet. Scrap of wire would soon outsmart Soviet engineering, silence the ghost range, and save thousands of men from the valley below. What began as one man's experiment would turn into one of the most quietly important field innovations of the Vietnam War. But first, Townsend had to find the courage to break a rule. Because in 1967, even a small act of defiance could cost a Marine his career or his freedom. And yet, the cost of doing nothing was much higher. The rain thickened over Quang Tri, carrying the smell of rust and gun oil through the trenches. Somewhere beyond the mist, a Dragunov cracked again. Another Marine ducked for cover. And Townsend tightened his jaw, staring at his rifle as if it were a puzzle waiting to be solved. The next step would take him far beyond the safety of orders, and closer to a discovery that the entire Marine Corps would one day rely on. Mitchell Townsend was born on the 18th of April 1944 in Greenwood, Mississippi, a small town surrounded by cotton fields and long dirt roads. His father, Elijah, worked at a repair shop and hunted on weekends to feed the family. Mitchell often went with him, carrying empty shells in his small hands and watching how his father aimed slow, steady, and patient. "Don't fight the rifle," Elijah told him once. "Work with it. Feel what it wants to do." That was the first lesson he ever learned about precision. It stayed with him for life. Growing up black in the South during the 1950 seconds meant facing closed doors almost everywhere. Schools had old books, broken desks, and teachers who often had to buy their own chalk. But one teacher, Mrs. Jackson, saw something in Mitchell. She noticed how he loved numbers, how he'd take apart clocks and radios just to see what made them tick. "Equations," she told him, "are just another way of aiming you line things up until they fit." Those words turned a curious boy into a quiet genius. Mitchell built small gadgets from scrap metal, used broken rulers as measuring tools, and learned to shoot bottles off fence posts using his father's single-shot rifle. Every day after school, he'd practice until the sun fell. His accuracy grew sharper, and so did his patience. In 1962, after finishing high school, Townsend joined the United States Marine Corps. He was 18. The recruiters didn't know what to do with a young man who could fix radios, rebuild carburetors, and shoot the wings off a fly. He was sent to Paris Island for training where sweat mixed with sea salt. Drill instructors barked commands, and every mistake echoed like thunder. Mitchell kept his head down and did what he always did: watch, learn, improve. At the rifle range, he stood out immediately. He didn't rush. He breathed, held, and squeezed. Each bullet punched the target center again and again. One instructor later wrote that Townsend seemed to talk to the rifle. Out of 250 recruits, he placed among the top 5 in marksmanship. It earned him a spot in advanced weapons training, where he learned how gas systems worked, how every rifle used pressure and timing like the moving parts of a heart. By 1965, he was in Vietnam, carrying the M14 rifle. The rifle was heavy, nearly 10 pounds of walnut wood and steel, but Townsend trusted it. He cleaned it carefully every night, wiping it down with oil that smelled like machine shops and motor grease. He studied how the gas piston vented pressure after each shot, how it cycled the bolt, how it kicked a little too hard when overheated. To him, every sound and smell told a story: the hiss of steam from the jungle, the metallic click of a chamber, the faint burnt powder scent that lingered after firing. Most men noticed danger first. Townsend noticed design. He also saw how many Marines treated rifles as just tools. To him, they were living systems, mechanical creatures that could be tuned, adjusted, and taught new tricks. But his curiosity sometimes caused tension. Officers warned him not to tamper with issued weapons. Orders were orders. The rules were clear. Yet he couldn't stop thinking, what if the weapon could do more? In one letter home, he wrote, "Sometimes it feels like the rifle is talking back. telling me there's something more inside it, waiting to come out. His mother kept that letter in a drawer for the rest of her life. By mid-1967, he was serving with the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. The unit had already seen months of sniper attacks. Townsend had lost friends. He had also seen how the same rifle that once gave him pride was now outclassed by Soviet weapons. The Dragunov could hit at 800 meters. His M14 could not. It wasn't fair. But in war, fairness didn't matter. At night, he sat under canvas tents with a small notebook, writing calculations by flashlight, distances, bullet drops, angles, wind speeds. Riley, his spotter, once peeked and asked, "What are you doing?" Townsend smiled. "Just trying to understand the wind." That understanding was deeper than anyone realized. Every number he wrote, every experiment he imagined, was leading him toward the copper wire, toward the day he'd change the M14 itself. For now, he was just another Marine, one rifle among many. But deep down, he carried a craftsman's hunger to build something better, even in the middle of war. And soon, that hunger would meet necessity, the kind of necessity that could decide who lived and who didn't. By the summer, every Marine in Quang Tri knew the sound of the enemy's Dragunov rifle. It was sharp and distant, a single crack that echoed from far beyond where any M14 bullet could reach. Then came the thud, the shout, the medic's call. The sound carried a message. They can see you, but you can't see them. The Dragunov SVD had been designed for moments like this. Built in the Soviet Union in the early 1960s, it was lighter than the M14, fired a smaller 7.6 2x54mm round, and had an optical sight that made it deadly at 800 meters or more. American manuals called its range formidable. Marines on the ground called it unfair. In contrast, the M14, America's pride, was known for its reliability and stopping power, but was only accurate out to about 500 meters in real combat conditions. On paper, it looked strong. In the jungle, it was suddenly outdated. That 300-meter gap became the difference between life and death. From January to June 1967, official reports recorded 17 Marines from Townsend's battalion killed by sniper fire from beyond their own rifle range. The number might have been small on a spreadsheet, but in the muddy reality of the field, every name meant another empty bunk, another photo folded into a helmet. Sometimes you never even heard the shot, Riley said later. You just see a man fall. The Dragunov had already spoken. Townsend saw it again and again. He watched bullets strike sandbags just inches from men's heads. He saw spotters scanning hillsides with binoculars, searching for muzzle flashes that never appeared. And each time, the same thought returned. The enemy could shoot farther, not because they were better, but because their tools were. He began studying the two rifles side by side. The M14 used a gas-operated piston system. When a bullet fired, gas vented from a small hole in the barrel, cycling the bolt for the next shot. But Townsend noticed that a lot of that gas, that power, escaped too early. The rifle was safe, dependable, and standardized for every climate. Yet that same safety limited its range. The Dragunov's system was tuned tighter, using more pressure to push the bullet faster. It meant more heat and maintenance, but it also meant greater reach. Townsend didn't have blueprints, lab tools, or testing equipment. He only had curiosity, a rifle, and what he'd learned from years of careful observation. He began to wonder, what if the M14 could hold its breath a little longer before releasing gas? What if that small delay could give the bullet more speed? It was a dangerous idea. Modifying a weapon in the field was against Marine Corps regulations, but the statistics kept haunting him. 17 men gone, a 300-meter disadvantage, a planned operation involving 2,000 Marines moving straight into enemy range. If nothing changed, hundreds might not make it home. The paradox was cruel. The US military, with its billion-dollar supply lines and endless factories, was losing a duel to a cheaper Soviet rifle, all because of one design detail no one dared to touch. Townsend began taking notes like an engineer under fire. He measured bullet cases, marked wind direction, even noted how the sound changed with humidity. His handwriting grew tighter, his words more urgent. In the margins, he wrote phrases like, "restrict vent, maybe plus 30 meters per second," and "too much bleed." He wasn't guessing. He was running small experiments carefully, secretly. He adjusted cleaning plugs, compared shot groups, and recorded how the recoil felt. Riley, his spotter, sometimes watched him and shook his head. "You're gonna get written up for that," he warned. Townsend only smiled. "Maybe. But if it works, they'll write me up in something else too." At night, the jungle hummed with insects and distant artillery. Townsend sat near his rifle, tracing its gas system with his finger. Didn't hate the M14, he respected it. But he knew it could do better. Somewhere inside that weapon, hidden beneath regulations and manuals, was more potential waiting to be unlocked. He didn't need new technology. He just needed a small change, a trick of pressure, a fraction of timing to make the rifle speak louder, farther, and faster. That small thought became an obsession. While others slept, Townsend kept tinkering, thinking, testing. Every shot brought him closer to something no one in the Marine Corps believed possible, a way to make the M14 outshoot the Dragunov. He didn't have much time. The Valley operation was approaching fast, and the ghosts in the tree line were still firing. Soon, Townsend would take a risk that could get him punished or praised, and in war, sometimes both happened in the same day. One hot afternoon, Townsend sat under a torn canvas tent, staring at his rifle on the table. Around him, the camp buzzed with noise, the clatter of mess tins, the smell of diesel and boiled rice, the dull rhythm of helicopters passing overhead. Yet in his mind, there was only silence, and one clear question. How can I give this rifle more power without breaking it? He thought about the gas system again, the tiny hole in the barrel that let pressure escape. It was designed to make the weapon safe and smooth, but it also stole speed from every bullet. If he could reduce that gas loss, even slightly, the bullet might travel faster and farther. It was a simple theory, but he needed a way to test it. He didn't have tools or spare parts. No one in the field did. So he looked around camp for anything he could use: wire, tape, scraps of metal. Nothing fit the size he needed. Then, one evening, he noticed a small roll of copper wire hanging behind the counter at the base exchange shop. It was meant for fixing radios. The price tag read 75 cents. He bought it with loose change from his pocket and slipped it into his pack. It was 16-gauge wire, soft but strong enough to twist and shape. That night, while others played cards and smoked, Townsend sat by lantern light with his rifle disassembled. He cut a short length of the copper wire and wrapped it tightly around the gas port, coiling it like a spring. The goal was simple: to narrow the vent just enough to keep more pressure behind the bullet. When Riley saw what he was doing, his eyes went wide. "You know that's illegal, right?" he said quietly. Townsend nodded. "So is dying when you don't have to." He wasn't reckless. He made the modification carefully, measuring each twist. He didn't want to block the gas completely, just slow it. He cleaned the rifle twice, checking for cracks or strain. Then, before dawn, he and Riley walked out to the range beyond the tree line. The jungle was heavy with fog, the air sticky and sour. The first light glowed behind the hills. Townsend took position on a sandbag, aimed at a target 500 meters away, and fired. The recoil felt sharper, stronger. The sound cracked louder than usual. He adjusted the sights and fired again, this time aiming farther 600 meters. The bullet struck the edge of the target. Riley stared through his binoculars. "No way," he whispered. Townsend didn't answer. He just loaded another round and stretched the distance again, 700 meters. Then 800. Each shot hit close, closer than the M14 had ever reached before. The barrel grew hot. The gas piston hissed like a kettle. Townsend knew he was pushing the weapon past its limits, but the results were undeniable. The copper wire had turned a standard rifle into something new, something dangerous. Still, the fix wasn't perfect. After 10 shots, The bolt started to slow, sticking from the added pressure. Carbon built up fast. Townsend had to clean it more often, or risk the rifle jamming. It was a trade-off, more power for less reliability. But in battle, that trade-off could mean saving dozens of lives. He wrote notes in his pocket log. 16-gauge copper wire restricts gas 10–15%. Adds to 100 meters per second muzzle velocity. Cycle delay equals 0.3 seconds. It wasn't official data, but it was proof. The idea worked. The paradox hit him like the humid air around him. He had solved a billion-dollar problem with something worth less than a candy bar. While factories back home produced rifles by the thousands, all it took here was one soldier, a roll of wire, and the will to question a rule. That night, Riley couldn't stop talking about it. "If this really works," he said, "you could change everything." Townsend shook his head. "No, not everything. Just enough." The experiment stayed secret for a while. Only Riley and a few trusted Marines knew. They called it the wire trick. Each time they cleaned the rifle, they checked the copper coil, making sure it held tight. The others didn't notice. To them, Townsend was just another sniper with steady hands. But soon, command would notice. And when they did, his 75-cent wire would cause a storm, far bigger than the one gathering in the Vietnam sky. For now, the jungle slept. The wire cooled around the barrel. And Townsend's idea waited silent, coiled, and ready to prove itself in battle. The 7th of August, 1967. The sun had not yet risen over Quang Tri. The jungle was still, the leaves wet with dew, and the air smelled of rain and gun oil. Sergeant Mitchell Townsend and Lance Corporal Franklin Riley crawled up a ridge called Observation Post 3. They carried one M14 rifle modified, wrapped with that small coil of copper wire that had already begun to tarnish in the humidity. Down below, the valley was quiet, too quiet. Somewhere in the trees ahead, enemy snipers waited with Dragunov rifles. For days, the Marines had been losing men along this ridge. Today, Townsend wanted to change that. He lay flat, pressed his cheek to the warm stock of the rifle, and looked through the scope. The jungle shimmered with mist. The early light turned the leaves silver. Through his scope, a shape moved, a man crouched beside a fallen log nearly 800 meters away. It was impossible range for the M14, at least according to the manuals. But Townsend didn't believe in those limits anymore. 800, maybe 820, Riley whispered, reading his rangefinder. Townsend nodded. "We'll see." He adjusted the scope, took a long breath, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, louder than usual, with a deep metallic ring. The bullet tore through the air, a faint blur against the morning fog. A heartbeat later, a small puff of dust rose near the enemy's cover. Then another movement, the man dropped flat, hit clean through the chest. Riley froze. "Jesus, you hit him. That's 800 meters. Townsend didn't answer. He reloaded, aimed again at another faint shape in the brush. Second shot, the same sharp crack, the same heavy recoil. The wire around the gas port glowed faintly from heat. Another target fell, Riley whispered. "That's two. They'll think it's artillery." Townsend fired twice more, each shot steady and measured. The copper coil held tight. By the fourth round, the rifle began groan slightly under the pressure, a slow cycling of the bolt, black carbon streaking the side. But it still worked. Against all logic, the M14 was reaching out past 800 meters. For nearly 20 minutes, the jungle was alive with distant movement. The enemy snipers were retreating, dragging wounded men away. The Marines below didn't yet understand what had happened. All they knew was that the ghost ranged the deadly invisible zone had gone silent. When the shooting stopped, Riley radioed command. "This is OP3. Enemy snipers neutralized. Range approximately 800 plus. Repeat, 800 plus." There was a long pause on the radio. Then a voice, cautious and confused. "Say again your range?" 800 meters, sir," Riley repeated. Sergeant Townsend's weapon, modified M14, confirmed 4 hits. Back at base, the report spread fast. Some officers didn't believe it. Others were angry. No Marine rifle was supposed to fire that far, and certainly not one that had been tampered with. But on the ridge, no one cared about regulations. The men were alive. For the first time in months, they had won a sniper duel. Townsend sat quietly, cleaning his rifle by hand. The barrel steamed in the humidity. Each pull of the cloth came out black with residue. The copper wire had turned dark and brittle, but it had held. Riley leaned beside him. "You just made this thing a legend," he said. Townsend gave a tired smile. "Let's keep that between us for now." By nightfall, word reached the battalion command post. Some officers called it reckless, others called it genius. Major Bradford ordered the rifle inspected. When the armourer took it apart, he found the wire coiled perfectly around the gas vent, simple, clean, and effective. He ran firing tests and confirmed the results. The rifle could now hit targets at over 900 meters in ideal conditions. The discovery caused both excitement and fear. Excitement, because it gave Marines a fighting chance. Fear, because it came from breaking the rules. Townsend was told he might face disciplinary review for unauthorized modification of government property. But when reports showed how his idea had saved men that morning, punishment became impossible. The paradox was complete. The same act that broke military law had just saved the military itself. Riley later said, "That day, every man on the ridge learned something. Sometimes you don't need permission to do the right thing." As night fell over Quang Tri, Townsend's copper wire cooled to a dull red, the heat fading from its tiny coils. The valley below was quiet for the first time in weeks. In the silence, the jungle smelled of wet dirt and burnt powder, the scent of survival. Townsend didn't celebrate. He only looked at his rifle, the weapon that had just rewritten the limits of possibility, and whispered to himself, "Let's see what they do with this." When Townsend returned from the ridge, he was met not with cheers, but with silence. The officers at the command post stared at his rifle, as if it were a piece of forbidden technology. The copper wire around the barrel looked small and harmless, but to them, it represented disobedience, a Marine who had dared to change government property without permission. Major Thomas Bradford asked him directly, "Did you alter this weapon, Sergeant?" "Yes, sir," Townsend said calmly. "To stop the enemy snipers. You could be court-martialed for this," Bradford replied. "Do you understand that?" "I do, sir," Townsend said. "But I also understand we'd have 17 more names on the wall if I hadn't." The room went quiet. The other officers exchanged looks. Everyone knew he was right. The results spoke louder than the regulations. 4 confirmed kills at over 800 meters, something no Marine rifle had ever done before in Vietnam. Still, military order demanded procedure, and the rifle was taken for inspection. At the armory, Staff Sergeant Walter Cunningham examined it closely. He turned the barrel under the light, noting the thin copper coil wound around the gas vent. "This is fieldwork," he said. "Crude, but clever." He fired test rounds at the range and confirmed it. The modified M14 reached out to 900 meters with surprising accuracy. It was unstable under sustained fire, but deadly in single, precise shots. Cunningham wrote in his report, "Increased muzzle velocity by roughly 100 meters per second. Recommend study for possible controlled modification." Captain Gerald Morrison, who had seen too many of his men fall to long-range fire, argued that Townsend's discovery should be replicated. Major Bradford wasn't convinced, but Colonel Thomas Richards, commanding the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, made the final call. "We test it," he said. "If it works, we use it." Over the next 2 weeks, Townsend was quietly reassigned to the battalion's small research and development group, really just a tent behind the maintenance sheds. There, with 2 armourers and a lathe borrowed from a nearby base, he helped design a safer version of his copper wire trick. Instead of wrapping the gas port with wire, they created a small, adjustable metal ring that could control how much gas escaped. They tested it under all conditions: sand, rain, mud, firing thousands of rounds. The results were the same: more range, more power, fewer losses. Word spread through the division like wildfire. Sniper teams from other companies came to see Townsend's rifle. They watched as bullets hit targets beyond the Dragunov's reach. One Marine said, "It was like turning an old dog into a racehorse." In early September 1967, the battalion issued its first batch of experimental gas regulators based on Townsend's design. They were simple, just small metal collars, machined in the field shop, but they changed everything. Within weeks, the number of long-range casualties dropped sharply. Still, not everyone approved. Some officers argued that modifying weapons was a dangerous precedent. Others quietly praised Townsend as a hero but couldn't say so publicly. Officially, he received a Navy Achievement Medal with a Combat V for valor, yet the citation never mentioned the copper wire. The Corps wasn't ready to admit that one man's field fix had outperformed its official equipment. But among the Marines, the truth was known. Townsend's trick became legend. New snipers began asking for the modified rifles. Armorers traded notes on how to install the regulators. By the end of September, almost every sniper team in Quang Tri had one. Townsend, meanwhile, kept working, improving the design, testing it in rain and heat, writing pages of notes about gas flow and recoil. He never boasted, never asked for recognition. When someone congratulated him, he just said, "It wasn't me. It was the math." The paradox of it all hung in the humid air. A man once threatened with punishment was now saving hundreds of lives because he refused to follow the rules. It showed that, in war, innovation doesn't always come from the top. Sometimes it starts with a single question, whispered in the dark, "What if?" By October, his design had become standard practice across several Marine units. The adjustable gas regulator, a cleaner version of that 75-cent wire, gave every Marine a fighting chance against the enemy's long-range rifles. Townsend's quiet defiance had turned into doctrine. The brass might not have liked how it began, but they couldn't deny what it achieved. As one officer later wrote, "Sergeant Townsend broke a rule to save his men. The rule survived. So did they." Outside the camp, the monsoon rains came again, washing the mud and soot off the rifles stacked by the tents. Among them sat Townsend's original M14, its wire blackened and burned, but still wrapped tightly around the barrel. A small, shining symbol of the day, a Marine dared to think differently. By the time autumn arrived in 1967, Townsend's quiet idea had already changed the rhythm of war in Quang Tri. The jungle still smelled of smoke and wet grass, but the mood in the Marine camps was different now. Snipers no longer felt helpless against distant shots. For the first time in months, they could fight back and win. Operation Medina began on the 23rd of September 1967. It was one of the largest missions in the northern sector, involving thousands of Marines sweeping through the high Lang forest. Before the operation, commanders feared terrible losses. Enemy snipers had ruled those hills for months. But with Townsend's modified rifles now spread among the scout sniper teams, the odds had shifted. The results were immediate. In the first week, sniper fire from the enemy dropped by nearly 60%. Marine marksmen, using the new adjustable gas regulators, began hitting targets at 800 and even 900 meters. Reports from the field mentioned surprising engagement distances and reduced long-range casualties. In the words of one captain, "The ghost range is gone." During the operation, Townsend's modification was tested in the toughest conditions: rain, mud, and constant fire. The rifles demanded extra cleaning, but they kept working. Sniper teams wrote in after-action notes that the new gas regulators added both reach and confidence. "It felt like we finally had our teeth back," one corporal wrote. By November 1967, the 3rd Marine Division compiled a formal study. Their analysts estimated that the improved rifles had helped prevent nearly 2,000 potential casualties in Quang Tri during that year alone. The number wasn't perfect science, but it reflected a truth every Marine in the field already knew. The difference between living and dying sometimes came down to one man's small act of curiosity. In the same report, officers recommended developing a standard adjustable gas system for future marine rifles. They also noted that Townsend's field experiment had demonstrated the need for soldier-level innovation under combat conditions. Those were cautious words, but for a military institution built on strict hierarchy, they were revolutionary. Yet even as his idea spread, Townsend remained humble. He kept serving quietly, still carrying his blackened M14 with the original copper wire. He refused to replace it with the polished versions issued later. When someone asked why, he said, "This one remembers where it came from." Recognition came slowly. After Operation Medina, Colonel Marcus Williams mentioned Townsend's name in an after-action briefing. Sergeant Mitchell Townsend's field modifications saved more Marines than any official design this year. That single sentence, buried deep in paperwork, ensured his idea would not be forgotten. Back in the United States, engineers at Quantico began studying his method. They redesigned the adjustable gas system for new rifles like the Berth M40A1 sniper weapon. Within a few years, Townsend's principle controlling gas flow to improve range became a foundation of marine rifle doctrine. The paradox, however, remained. The man who had broken a rule now had his name quietly written into those same rulebooks. Official histories spoke of field-driven improvement, but few mentioned the 75-cent wire. Still, among Marines, stories traveled faster than official memos. At training camps, instructors told recruits about the sniper who rewired his rifle. They said it as a lesson, not about engineering, but about courage. The message was simple: follow the book until the book gets you killed, then write a better one. By late 1968, the copper wire story had crossed oceans. Navy technicians used similar logic to test high-pressure systems on naval guns. Air Force armorers studied it for aircraft weapon mounts. What began as a small battlefield hack was now influencing how the entire U.S. military thought about flexibility and adaptation. Townsend received a quiet letter of thanks from Major General Bruno Hawkmoth, commander of the 3rd Marine Division. It praised his initiative and technical skill under combat conditions. It didn't mention the wire, but it meant the same thing. In private moments, Townsend still struggled with how close he had come to being punished. "It's strange," he once told Riley. "You save lives by breaking rules, and then they give you a medal for following orders." Riley laughed. "That's the Marine Corps for you." The official reports marked success in numbers 2,000 Marines alive, a 60% drop in sniper casualties, better morale, improved accuracy. But for Townsend, the true victory wasn't in statistics. It was in the quiet moments when a patrol returned safely, when no one had to write another name on the casualty board, when young soldiers stopped ducking at every echo from the trees. He knew the difference his small invention made. And though history might never fully credit him, the proof lived in every Marine who survived to tell the tale. As 1967 came to a close, the war went on, but something fundamental had changed. The Dragunov no longer ruled the distance. The Americans had caught up with a rifle, a roll of copper wire, and a man who believed that sometimes the right thing to do was simply what worked. When the war ended, Sergeant Mitchell Townsend went home to Mississippi, a quiet man. He didn't look for fame or medals. He went back to fixing machines in a small workshop near Greenwood, the same town where he had learned to shoot cans off fence posts with his father. People in town knew he was a veteran, but few knew that his small idea had once saved thousands of lives. For many years, his story stayed buried in field notes and forgotten reports. The Marine Corps had moved on to new rifles and new wars. But Townsend's copper wire trick never completely disappeared. In every generation of Marine snipers, someone had heard of the wireman, the soldier who used 75 cents and courage to outshoot the enemy. In 1991, the story finally came to light again. Colonel Walter Cunningham, who had once served with Townsend, published an article in the U.S. Naval Institute Proceedings. The piece was called "Improvisation Under Fire," In it, he described the day one Marine turned an outdated rifle into a weapon that could compete with Soviet technology. He didn't reveal all the details, but readers understood who that Marine was. The article spread through military circles. Instructors at Quantico brought it up during sniper training lectures. They spoke of innovation born from necessity. Some even called Townsend's copper wire the cheapest military upgrade in history. By 1997, the Marine Corps invited Townsend to Quantico as a guest of honor. He walked through the Scout Sniper School, now filled with new rifles all built with adjustable gas systems based on his field concept. Younger Marines saluted him, though most had only heard fragments of his story. When asked what it felt like to see his idea taught in classrooms, Townsend smiled gently and said, "It feels like proof that thinking can save lives." The Corps placed a small bronze plaque in his name inside the school hall. It didn't tell his whole story, but it carried his quote, "Sometimes being right in combat matters more than being authorized." Those words summed up his life, a mix of duty, doubt, and quiet defiance. In his later years, Townsend still wrote letters to his old spotter, Franklin Riley. They talked about the war, about friends who never came home, about how strange it felt to have changed history without meaning to. Riley once wrote back, "You did more with wire and grit than factories ever did with steel." Townsend passed away on the 12th of June 2011 at the age of 67. His funeral was small. A folded flag lay across his casket. Few knew that the man being buried had once saved an entire battalion, with nothing but a bit of copper and belief. After his death, the National Museum of the Marine Corps added a small display in his honor. Inside a glass case sat his original M14 rifle still wrapped with that blackened, burnt wire, and a faded logbook filled with neat handwriting and simple notes. Test range 820 meters. Wire stable under heat, Riley confirmed. Visitors often walked past without realizing what they were seeing, but those who read the inscription paused quietly. The caption said, "Sergeant Mitchell Townsend Field Innovation, Quang Tri, 1967, saved 2,000 Marines." Over time, his story became something larger than one man's invention. It became a lesson. Military academies began teaching the Townsend principle, that rules keep order, but creativity wins wars. Engineers, historians, and soldiers all repeated the same truth. The smallest ideas can have the biggest reach. The paradox of Townsend's life was simple but powerful. The same Marine who was once threatened with punishment ended up shaping Marine rifle doctrine for decades. The act that broke the rules became the rule itself. Today, when modern Marines adjust their weapon gas regulators before a mission, most don't know whose idea it was. But every time they do, they follow in the steps of that quiet man from Mississippi who refused to accept good enough. His story reminds us that heroism isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, careful, and wrapped in copper. Townsend's life carries a timeless message that courage isn't only found in battlefields. It's found in the willingness to think differently when others are afraid to try. He came to Vietnam as one soldier among thousands. He left as proof that a single idea, born in mud and fear, could outlast the war itself. They say rules make soldiers, but sometimes the soldiers who make history are the ones who bend them not out of pride, but out of love for those beside them. In the end, Sergeant Mitchell Townsend taught the world a simple truth. America's greatest weapon has never been its machines. It has always been the minds of the people who use them.